Miguel worked nights cleaning a restaurant for extra money. When a robber pointed his gun at a rich family's little girl, Miguel jumped in front of her. The bullet hit his shoulder. Hours later, the grateful billionaire family sent their private jet to take him to a new life. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The grease trap at Romano's Italian kitchen was the worst part of Miguel Santos's job, but it paid an extra $20 to clean it, and $20 meant his 7-year-old daughter Sofia could have the name brand cereal she'd been asking for instead of the generic stuff that tasted like cardboard. So Miguel rolled up his sleeves, pulled on his rubber gloves and got to work, trying not to breathe through his nose. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the restaurant was nearly empty. Just a few late diners finishing their meals while Miguel moved through his nightly routine, mopping floors, wiping down tables, emptying trash cans, and fighting with the ancient grease trap that Romano refused to replace. The owner, Mr. Romano, had left hours ago, leaving Miguel to lock up when he finished. It was honest work even if it didn't pay much, and Miguel was grateful for it. At 32, Miguel had been working nights for 3 years, ever since his wife Carmen had died in the car accident that had also left Sofia with a permanent limp. During the day he tried to sleep while Sofia was at school, picking her up at 3 p.m. and spending the afternoon helping with homework and making dinner before heading to Romano's at 6 p.m. It wasn't the life he'd planned when he'd married Carmen at 23, dreaming of opening his own restaurant someday, but it was the life he had, and he was determined to make it work. Sofia was staying with Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor, who watched her in the evenings for $40 a week, money Miguel could barely afford but couldn't do without. Mrs. Henderson was kind and patient, reading Sofia bedtime stories and helping her with math homework when Miguel couldn't be there. Still, Miguel hated missing those bedtime stories, hated that his daughter was asleep when he got home at 1 a.m. and already at school when he woke up at 2 p.m. But she understood, in the way children of single parents learn to understand. Daddy worked hard so they could have a home and food and the things they needed. Miguel was wrestling with a particularly stubborn piece of congealed grease when he heard voices from the dining room. He paused, listening. Romano's had been closed for an hour, but sometimes people tried the doors anyway, hoping for late-night service. Miguel usually had to politely turn them away, explaining that the kitchen was closed and cleaned for the night. But these voices sounded different, urgent, agitated. And there was something else, a child crying. Miguel set down his tools and walked toward the dining room, wiping his hands on his apron. Through the swinging doors that separated the kitchen from the main restaurant, he could see 4 people at one of the corner tables. A man and woman in expensive suits, a little girl who couldn't be much older than Sofia, and another man standing over them with his back to Miguel. The standing man was holding something in his hand, something that made Miguel's blood run cold. A gun. Miguel's first instinct was to call 911, but his phone was in his locker in the back room, and moving toward it would mean walking past the dining room entrance where the gunman might see him. His second instinct was to hide in the kitchen until it was over, to protect himself so he could go home to Sofia. But then the little girl sobbed, and something in that sound made Miguel think of his own daughter, of how terrified Sofia would be in that situation, of how desperately he would want someone, anyone, to help her if she were the one in danger. Miguel crept closer to the doors, trying to get a better view of the situation. The family at the table was clearly wealthy. The woman's handbag probably cost more than Miguel made in 6 months, and the man's watch glinted with what looked like real gold. The little girl was wearing a designer dress and patent leather shoes, her dark hair pulled back with a ribbon that matched her outfit perfectly. The gunman was young, maybe early 20s, with the jittery movements of someone high on drugs or desperation. Miguel could hear him now, his voice cracking with emotion. "I know who you are," the gunman was saying to the man in the suit. "Richard Castellanos, right? The billionaire? I've seen your picture in the papers." The man, Richard, nodded slowly, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of non-aggression. "Yes, that's me. But please, my daughter has nothing to do with whatever this is about. Let her go and we can talk about whatever you need." "What I need?" The gunman laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What I need is for people like you to stop existing. What I need is for my little brother to not be dead because he couldn't afford his insulin. What I need is for the world to make sense again." Miguel's heart clenched with recognition. Desperation, grief, the kind of rage that came from watching someone you love suffer while people with money lived in comfort. He'd felt those emotions himself in the months after Carmen's death, when the medical bills and funeral costs had threatened to destroy what little financial stability they'd had. "I'm sorry about your brother," Richard said, his voice gentle but firm. "That's a terrible loss and I can't imagine your pain. But hurting my daughter won't bring him back. Maybe not, the gunman said, but it'll hurt you the way you hurt me. The way people like you hurt people like us every single day. The little girl, she couldn't be more than 6, was crying quietly, trying to be brave but unable to hide her terror. She reminded Miguel so much of Sofia that his chest ached. This child had done nothing wrong, had no part in whatever tragedy had driven this young man to violence, and she was about to pay the price for sins she didn't understand. Miguel looked at the gunman's position, calculating angles and distances with the tactical awareness he'd learned during his brief stint in the army before Sofia was born. The man was focused entirely on the family, his back partially turned toward the kitchen. If Miguel moved quickly and quietly, he might be able to get close enough to tackle him before he could hurt anyone. It was a stupid plan. Miguel was outnumbered, outgunned, and completely untrained for this kind of situation. If he failed, Sofia would lose the only parent she had left. She would become an orphan, dependent on the foster care system, her life forever changed by his choice to play hero. But if he did nothing, this little girl would die, and Miguel would have to live with the knowledge that he could have acted and chose not to. He thought about Sofia's face when she talked about the bullies at school, how she always said someone should stand up to them even though she was too small to do it herself. How could he teach her to be brave if he wasn't willing to be brave himself? Miguel pushed through the swinging doors. "Hey," he called out, trying to sound calm and non-threatening. "I don't want any trouble. I'm just the janitor. I need to finish cleaning so I can go home to my daughter." The gunman spun around, his weapon now pointed at Miguel. Up close, Miguel could see that he was just a kid, maybe 21 or 22, with hollow eyes and the kind of desperate energy that came from having nothing left to lose. "Get out of here," the gunman snapped. "This doesn't involve you." "You're right," Miguel said, taking a small step closer. "It doesn't involve me. But it doesn't involve that little girl either, does it? She's not the one who hurt your brother. She's just a kid like my Sofia." "Your Sofia?" The gunman's voice cracked slightly. "My daughter. She's 7. About the same age as this little one." Miguel gestured toward the girl, who was watching him with wide, frightened eyes. "She lost her mom 3 years ago. Car accident. And sometimes I get angry at the world too, angry at people who seem to have everything when we have so little. But taking it out on an innocent child, that's not going to fix anything." The gunman was wavering, Miguel could see it. The weapon was still pointed in his direction, but the young man's grip had loosened slightly. "My brother was innocent too," the gunman said. "He was only 16. He died because we couldn't afford his medicine. Do you know what that's like? Watching someone you love die because of money." "Yes," Miguel said simply. "I do. My wife didn't die because of money, but the bills afterward, they almost destroyed us. I know what it's like to feel helpless, to feel like the world doesn't care about people like us." "Then you understand," the gunman said, and Miguel could see tears mixing with the rage in his eyes. "I understand the pain," Miguel said, taking another small step forward. "But this won't heal it. Hurting this family won't bring your brother back. It'll just create more pain, more loss. That little girl will grow up traumatized and her parents will carry this forever. Is that really what your brother would want?" For a moment, Miguel thought he was getting through. The gunman's shoulders sagged slightly, and his grip on the weapon loosened further. But then Richard Castellanos made a mistake. "Listen, son," Richard said, his voice carrying the unconscious authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I can help you. I have money, resources. We can get you the help you need, maybe even start a foundation in your brother's name." "Help?" The gunman's rage reignited instantly. "A foundation? You think you can buy your way out of this with your charity? You think throwing money at me will make up for what you people have done?" The weapon swung back toward the little girl, and Miguel saw the gunman's finger tighten on the trigger. Time slowed to crystalline clarity. Miguel could see every detail, the terror on the child's face, the horror in her parents' eyes, the desperate rage consuming the young man with the gun. There was no time to talk him down, no time for negotiation or psychology. There was only time to act. Miguel launched himself forward, covering the distance between himself and the gunman in 3 quick strides. He hit the young man at the waist, driving him away from the table and toward the floor. The gun fired as they went down, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Pain exploded through Miguel's shoulder as the bullet tore through muscle and bone, but he held on to the gunman, using his weight and momentum to pin him to the floor. The weapon skittered across the tiles, out of reach. "Are you okay?" Miguel gasped, looking toward the table where the family was huddled together. "Is everyone okay?" "Yes," Richard called back, his voice shaky but strong. "Yes, we're okay. Thank you. Thank you." Miguel could hear sirens in the distance, Someone must have called 911. Help was coming. The little girl was safe. That was all that mattered. The gunman beneath him had stopped struggling, the fight going out of him as suddenly as it had begun. He was crying now, the rage replaced by grief and exhaustion. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do." "I know," Miguel said, his own voice growing weaker as blood loss began to take its toll. "I know you're hurting. But this isn't the way." The last thing Miguel saw before consciousness slipped away was the little girl's face, tear-streaked but alive, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude maybe. Or something deeper. Miguel woke up in a hospital room that was nicer than any he'd ever seen. The walls were painted in soft blues and greens instead of institutional white, there were actual windows with a view of mountains instead of air vents, and the bed was so comfortable he briefly wondered if he was dreaming. "Dad." Sophia's voice, small and scared, came from somewhere to his left. Miguel turned his head, carefully because his shoulder was wrapped in bandages and moving hurt, to see his daughter sitting in a chair beside the bed. She was wearing a new dress he didn't recognize, and her hair was braided in an elaborate style that Mrs. Henderson definitely didn't know how to do. "Hey Nina," Miguel said softly. "What are you doing here? You should be in school. Mrs. Henderson brought me when the hospital called. But then the nice lady said I could stay with you, and she bought me this dress and did my hair and everything." Sophia's words tumbled over each other in the way they did when she was excited or overwhelmed. "Dad, this place is so fancy. Look, there's even a TV that shows movies." Miguel looked around the room more carefully. This definitely wasn't a standard hospital room. The furniture looked expensive, there were fresh flowers on the bedside table, and he could see what looked like a sitting area near the windows. "Sophia, who's the nice lady you mentioned?" Before Sophia could answer, there was a soft knock on the door. It opened to reveal the woman from the restaurant, Richard Castellanos' wife, followed by the little girl Miguel had saved. Both of them looked much calmer than they had during the crisis, but Miguel could see the exhaustion in the woman's eyes that came from trauma and sleepless nights. "Mr. Santos," the woman said, approaching his bed with the kind of careful formality that spoke of good breeding and expensive education. "I'm Elena Castellanos. This is my daughter Lucia. We've been waiting for you to wake up." Lucia stepped forward shyly, holding a drawing in her small hands. "I made this for you," she said, offering the paper to Miguel. Miguel took the drawing carefully, mindful of his injured shoulder. It showed two stick figures, one tall, one small, standing together under a rainbow. In a child's careful handwriting it read, "Thank you for saving me." "It's beautiful, Lucia," Miguel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." "Lucia insisted on making that for you," Elena said, settling into a chair near his bed. "She's been asking about you constantly since the incident. We all have." Miguel looked between Elena and Lucia, then at Sophia, who was watching the interaction with wide-eyed curiosity. "Mrs. Castellanos, I don't understand. Why are you here? And why is this?" He gestured around the luxurious room. "Why is any of this necessary?" Elena's composure cracked slightly, and Miguel could see tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Mr. Santos, Miguel, you saved my daughter's life. You took a bullet meant for her. You could have died protecting a child you didn't even know. Anyone would have done the same thing," Miguel said automatically. "No," Elena shook her head firmly. "No, anyone wouldn't have. Most people would have hidden, called 911, waited for someone else to handle it. You put yourself between a gun and my baby without thinking about the consequences." Lucia climbed carefully onto the side of Miguel's bed, her small face serious. "Mommy says you're a hero. Are you really a hero?" Miguel looked at this little girl, so different from Sophia in some ways but so similar in others. Both of them had that innocent trust that adults would protect them, both of them deserved to grow up safe and loved. "I'm not a hero, Lucia. I'm just a dad. And when I saw you in danger, I thought about my own little girl and what I would want someone to do for her." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," Elena said softly. "The fact that you can't see it yourself." Sophia had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. "Dad, are we in trouble? This place is really fancy and I don't think our insurance covers fancy places." Miguel's heart sank. Of course. This room, this level of care, it probably cost more per day than he made in a month. "Mrs. Castellanos, I appreciate everything you've done but I can't afford." "Miguel," Elena interrupted gently, "please let me finish. You're not paying for any of this. Not the room, not the medical care, not anything. My husband and I, we want to do more than just pay your hospital bills. Before Miguel could protest, the door opened again and Richard Castellanos entered, followed by a woman in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. Richard looked tired but determined, and he moved with the kind of purposeful energy that Miguel associated with people who were used to getting things done. "Miguel," Richard said, approaching the bed with his hand extended for a handshake. "I'm Richard Castellanos. We haven't been properly introduced, but I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for my family." Miguel shook his hand carefully, still confused by the formal tone of the conversation. "Mr. Castellanos, you don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone should do maybe, but what very few people actually would do," Richard finished. "Miguel, I've been thinking about what happened that night, and I realize that words aren't enough. Thank you isn't enough. I want to do something that will actually make a difference in your life." The woman with the briefcase stepped forward. "Mr. Santos, I'm Jennifer Walsh, Mr. Castellanos' attorney. We'd like to discuss a proposition with you." Miguel felt a flutter of panic. Lawyers and propositions weren't things that usually happened to people like him, and they certainly weren't things that usually ended well. "What kind of proposition?" he asked cautiously. Richard pulled up a chair next to Miguel's bed, while Elena did the same on the other side. Sophia and Lucia watched the adults with the kind of fascination children reserve for grown-up conversations they don't quite understand. "Miguel," Richard began, "I've done some research into your background. You served in the army, you have management experience from before your wife's death, and everyone I've spoken to says you're intelligent, hardworking, and honest. Is that accurate?" Yes, sir. I suppose so." "Good. I'm offering you a job. Executive Security Coordinator for Castellanos Industries. It would involve overseeing safety protocols for our facilities, coordinating with law enforcement and security firms, and helping develop emergency response procedures." Miguel stared at him. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I clean grease traps for a living. I don't know anything about corporate security." "You know more than you think," Richard said. "You assessed a dangerous situation, made a tactical decision under pressure, and executed it successfully. You put yourself in harm's way to protect innocent people. Those are exactly the qualifications I'm looking for." Jennifer opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "The position comes with a starting salary of $85,000 per year, full health and dental benefits, and a signing bonus of $50,000. There's also a college fund for Sophia, full tuition, room and board to any university she chooses to attend." Miguel felt the world tilt around him. $85,000 was more than he'd made in the past 3 years combined. It was enough to move out of their tiny apartment, enough to buy Sophia the clothes and books and experiences he'd been unable to provide, enough to build the kind of life he'd dreamed of but never thought possible. "I don't understand," he said weakly. "Why would you do this? I mean, I'm grateful, but this is too much." Elena leaned forward, her eyes bright with tears. "Miguel, that young man with the gun, he was angry at people like us. He felt like the world was divided into two groups, people who have everything and people who have nothing. And in some ways he was right. There is inequality, there is suffering that money could solve but doesn't get solved." Richard nodded. "You could have looked at our family and seen the same thing that gunmen saw, wealthy people whose problems don't matter because we have resources to solve them. But instead you saw a child in danger and decided to protect her. You didn't ask about our bank account or our social status. You just acted. That's what real character looks like," Elena added. "And it's the kind of character we want in our organization. We want people who make decisions based on what's right, not what's profitable." Sophia had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement. Now she tugged on Miguel's uninjured arm. "Dad, does this mean you won't have to work at night anymore? Does this mean you can read me bedtime stories again?" Miguel looked at his daughter. His beautiful, patient, understanding daughter who'd never complained about the sacrifices their circumstances required but who deserved so much more than he'd been able to give her. "Yeah, mi Nina," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think it does." Lucia clapped her hands together excitedly. "Does this mean Sophia can come play at our house? We have a swimming pool and horses." "Horses?" Sophia's eyes went wide with wonder. Elena smiled. "We'd love to have Sophia visit. In fact, we were hoping you might consider letting the girls become friends. Lucia has been asking about Sophia constantly since I told her about you." Miguel looked around the room, at the expensive furnishings, at Elena's designer clothes, at the evidence of wealth and privilege that surrounded the Castellanos family. Then he looked at Lucia, who was chattering excitedly with Sophia about horses and swimming pools, and saw not a rich child but simply a little girl who wanted a friend. Mr. Castellanos, Miguel said slowly, I have to ask, why me? Why this job? You could hire anyone, someone with real credentials, real experience. Richard was quiet for a moment, then looked at his daughter. Lucia, can you tell Mr. Santos what happened after the police came that night? Lucia nodded solemnly. After the ambulance took you away, Daddy and I were in the police car, and I asked him why you helped us when you didn't even know us. And Daddy said it was because you have a good heart. And then, Richard continued, I asked myself what kind of man I wanted working for my company. Someone with credentials on paper, or someone who'd proven under pressure that he'd do the right thing even when it cost him something. Elena touched Miguel's hand gently. Miguel, that night changed all of us. It reminded my husband and me that success means nothing if you don't use it to help good people when you can. And it showed us that the kind of character we want to surround ourselves with can't be bought or taught, it just is. Miguel felt tears burning behind his eyes. For 3 years he'd been struggling, working jobs that didn't use his skills or education, accepting charity from neighbors, feeling like he was failing as a father because he couldn't provide the kind of life Sophia deserved. But maybe he'd been measuring success wrong. Maybe the most important thing wasn't how much money he made or what kind of house they lived in. Maybe the most important thing was the choice he'd made in that split second when he'd seen a child in danger. The choice to act, to protect, to put someone else's safety before his own. There's one more thing, Jennifer said, pulling another document from her briefcase. Mr. and Mrs. Castellanos would like to establish a scholarship fund in your name, the Miguel Santos Scholarship for Children of Single Parents. It would provide educational support for kids in situations similar to Sophia's. Miguel stared at the document, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. Not just a job, not just financial security, but the chance to help other families facing the same struggles he'd faced. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Say yes, Dad, Sophia said, bouncing slightly in her chair. Say yes so we can have adventures and I can be friends with Lucia and you can help other kids like me. Miguel looked at his daughter. His wise, wonderful daughter who understood that this opportunity was about more than just improving their own lives. Then he looked at Lucia who was waiting hopefully for his answer, and at Elena and Richard, who were offering not just charity but genuine partnership. Yes, he said finally. Yes, I'd be honored to work for your company. The room erupted in cheers from the two girls, while Elena wiped away tears and Richard smiled with the satisfaction of someone who just made an excellent business decision. There's one more surprise, Elena said, glancing at her husband. We know you'll need time to recover from your injury and get settled in your new position. So we'd like to invite you and Sophia to spend that time at our estate in Napa Valley. Lucia could use a friend and you could use some rest. Sophia's gasp of excitement was audible. Dad, can we? Please? Miguel thought about their tiny apartment, about Mrs. Henderson babysitting Sophia while he recovered, about the bills that would continue to pile up even if he wasn't working. That's very generous, he said, but I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, Richard said firmly. Miguel, you took a bullet for our daughter. The least we can do is offer you a place to heal. Besides, Lucia added with 6-year-old logic, it'll be fun. We can show Sophia the horses and the gardens and the library with all the books. Miguel looked at Sophia's face, bright with excitement and hope, and made his decision. Okay, he said. Thank you. We'd love to come. 2 hours later, Miguel found himself being wheeled to a waiting car in a wheelchair he didn't need but that hospital policy required. Sophia walked beside him, chattering excitedly about airplanes and horses and new friends, while Elena and Lucia led the way. The car was a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than Miguel's annual salary at Romano's, but it was the vehicle waiting on the tarmac that truly took his breath away. Is that? Miguel started to ask. Our jet, Elena confirmed with a smile. Richard thought you might be more comfortable flying privately, given your injury and everything you've been through. Miguel had never seen a private jet up close, let alone imagined he'd ever ride in one. It was smaller than a commercial airliner but somehow more impressive, gleaming white and silver in the afternoon sun. Sophia was practically vibrating with excitement. Dad, are we really going to fly in that? It's like something from a movie. It's very nice, Miguel agreed, still somewhat stunned by the surreal turn his life had taken. Lucia took Sophia's hand as they approached the plane. Wait until you see the inside. There are big chairs that turn into beds and there's a TV, and the pilot sometimes lets kids see the cockpit. As they boarded the jet, Miguel marveled at the luxury surrounding them. Leather seats that were larger and more comfortable than most furniture, polished wood surfaces, and windows that offered panoramic views. Sophia and Lucia settled into seats across from each other, already deep in conversation about their favorite movies and books. Elena sat down next to Miguel as the plane began to taxi for takeoff. "How are you feeling? About all of this, I mean." Miguel considered the question. "Overwhelmed," he admitted. "Grateful. Confused. I keep waiting to wake up and find out this is all a dream." "I understand. 3 days ago you were a janitor supporting your daughter on minimum wage. Now you're flying on a private jet to a job that will change your life forever. It's a lot to process." "Mrs. Castellanos, Elena, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why does this matter so much to you and your husband? I mean, I understand gratitude, but this is life-changing generosity." "Why?" Elena was quiet for a moment, looking out the window as the plane lifted off. "Miguel, my husband and I have more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. We live in beautiful homes, we travel anywhere we want, we can buy anything we desire. But do you know what we can't buy?" Miguel shook his head. "Peace of mind. The knowledge that when our daughter is in danger, someone will step forward to protect her. The certainty that there are still good people in the world who will choose to do the right thing even when it costs them something." She turned to look at him directly. "You gave us something priceless that night, Miguel. You gave us faith in humanity. You showed us that character isn't about wealth or education or social status. It's about the choices you make when everything is on the line." Miguel watched Sophia and Lucia giggling together across the aisle, already fast friends despite their different backgrounds. "Your daughter seems wonderful. You've raised her well." "Thank you. And Sophia is delightful. Lucia has been telling me about her all morning, how smart she is, how kind, how she wants to be a teacher when she grows up so she can help other kids learn." "She got that from her mother," Miguel said softly. "Carmen was a teacher. She always said that education was the one thing no one could take away from you, no matter how poor you were or where you came from. She sounds like a wise woman." "She was. I think she would have liked you and your family. She always believed that good people find each other, regardless of their circumstances." Elena smiled. "I think I would have liked her too." As the jet climbed toward cruising altitude, Miguel closed his eyes and tried to process everything that had happened. 48 hours ago he'd been scrubbing grease traps and counting pennies. Now he was flying to a new life, a new career, a future he'd never dared to imagine for himself and Sophia. But more than the material changes, something fundamental had shifted in how he saw himself. For 3 years he'd felt like he was failing as a father, unable to provide the kind of life Sophia deserved. He'd measured his worth by his paycheck, his success by his ability to pay bills on time. Now he understood that the most important thing he could give his daughter wasn't money or material comfort. It was the example of who to be when faced with impossible choices. Sophia would grow up knowing that her father was the kind of man who stepped between a gun and a child, who chose courage over safety, who proved that heroism wasn't about having superpowers but about having the right heart. "Dad." Sophia's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are you okay? You look sad." Miguel smiled at his daughter, this amazing little girl who'd handled their struggles with grace and who was now embracing this incredible opportunity with joy and excitement. "I'm not sad, me Nina. I'm happy. I'm thinking about how proud Mama would be of both of us right now." Sophia's face lit up. "She would be proud, wouldn't she? Proud that you saved Lucia, and proud that we're going to have a better life now." "She would be very proud," Miguel confirmed. "And she would love Lucia and Elena and Richard because they have good hearts just like we do." Lucia looked up from the coloring book Elena had given her. "Miguel, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Were you scared when you saw the bad man with the gun?" Miguel considered his answer carefully. "Yes, I was very scared. I was scared I might get hurt, and scared that I might not be able to protect you." "But you did it anyway?" "Yes." "Why?" Miguel looked at this little girl, so young, so innocent, trying to understand why a stranger had risked his life for her. "Because, Lucia, when you see someone in trouble, especially someone smaller than you who can't protect themselves, you help them. That's what good people do." Lucia nodded solemnly. "That's what Daddy says too. He says we have to use our blessings to help other people." "Your daddy is right. And that's why your family is helping Sophia and me now, because they want to use their blessings to make our lives better. And now Sophia and I can be best friends." "Now you can be best friends," Miguel agreed, smiling at the simple joy children found in new friendships. As the jet flew toward their new life, Miguel reflected on the strange turns that fate could take. A routine night at work had become a moment of crisis, which had become a life-changing opportunity. One split-second decision to act instead of hide had transformed not just his own future, but Sophia's as well. He thought about the young man with the gun, who was now in jail awaiting trial but who would hopefully get the help he needed. He thought about the other families struggling as he had struggled, and about the scholarship fund that would help their children pursue their dreams. He thought about the ripple effects of one moment of courage, spreading outward to touch lives he might never know about. Most of all, he thought about Sophia, who would grow up with opportunities he'd never imagined possible, but who would also grow up knowing that her father was a hero, not because he was rich or famous or powerful, but because when it mattered most he had chosen love over fear. The jet flew on through the afternoon sky, carrying two families toward a future none of them could have predicted but all of them had earned through kindness, courage, and the recognition that the best parts of humanity are revealed in our willingness to protect each other. Below them, the world spread out in a patchwork of cities and farmland, millions of people living their own stories of struggle and hope. And somewhere among them, other heroes were making their own split-second decisions to act with courage, creating their own ripples of change that would spread outward in ways they might never know. Miguel Santos, former janitor, current hero and future executive, settled back in his leather seat and watched his daughter laugh with her new best friend, knowing that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest choice: to step forward when others step back, to protect the innocent, and to believe that love is always stronger than fear.